So without further ado, I'd like to bring Jared James. Is in the house.
Well, good morning, everybody. Are you happy to be here today? All right, then. This is, I think it goes without saying, an absolute honor. I spent, for those of you who don't know me, I spent years and years, weeks and weeks, months and months sitting in these chairs, sitting under this man. And so to be able to do this, not just to do it like this, but to be able to have my wife, my oldest son here, to have him sitting in the back, although I'm convinced he's going to be sitting there giving like a thumbs up or a thumbs down the whole time to let you guys know whether what I said is good or not. So let me know if it is. But it's an absolute honor. This is a different thing. I mean, I was very lucky. I've been here 20 plus years, and I got to spend a lot of time with him. We played a lot of tennis. We did these things. When I was 16 years old, I used to occasionally get to drive his Ford Explorer around town. And you've never thought you were cool till you're driving around with that KLCC1 on the license plate until you get out of the store and everyone's disappointed that it's only you. With the tinted windows. So the last 20 years, a lot of stuff has changed. The last 20 years, I mean, think of it this way. I was thinking about this before I came out. Do you realize this thing is only 10 years old? Do you realize that? Do you realize that when I started here, people didn't have iPhones and iPads and smartphones? And do you realize there are grown men in here that have sent other grown men emojis in the past week? Do you understand this? Do you understand that there are grown men in this room that sent a poop emoji this morning? Things have changed quite a bit since I first started here. And yet I actually kind of love this. I love the fact that we have smartphones now. Obviously, there's a lot of negative things that come. But it's amazing to me because any of you have like your parents or they're a certain way, but when it comes to text or it comes to whatever, they have a little different personality. Do any of you know what I'm talking about? Like my grandfather comes from the age of like John Wayne, where if he didn't kill you, it meant that he loved you. And my grandfather used to, as soon as he started getting on this stuff, he started sending me emails with smiley faces. Bishop has always been, we've had this relationship, and, he's always kind of, when you're talking to him, he's kind of, subtle, and he's straight, and he just kind of tells you how it is. And then we started texting back and forth, and he ends every text message, which I love you, with a smiley face, okay? I'm sorry. I was convinced that Janine had his phone. I'm not going to lie. One time I showed Ronette, I'm like, is this really? I almost wrote him back, did somebody get your phone? But you see a different side of people. This whole world opens up. I love the fact that we can connect socially. I love the fact that I can do this today, and if you hear something you like, you can tag people, and you can put it out to the masses, and you can do that stuff. I think that there's power in that, okay? And so there's a lot of changes that have happened, a lot of good changes. But what I want to say today is that these changes are amazing. But God is looking for us to go beyond those small changes. God is looking to challenge the very ways that we think, our thought processes. God is looking to change even our very traditions, which some of you did not like right there. Guys, there are powerful things about traditions. There is repetition in tradition, which helps us get to where we want to go. But some of our traditions are the very things that are keeping the people out there who actually need God from coming in here. Some of you are going to have an issue listening to me because I have jeans on. And yet there's someone else watching on that live stream that the only reason they'll even listen to me is because I have jeans on. So one of the things I'm going to ask of you today is that you listen to the message, not necessarily the messenger. Does that make sense? Listen to the message. I was at a conference last week in Winnipeg. And I'm in Winnipeg, and at this conference, there's thousands of people at this conference, and for some reason, this one guy just stood out to me, this one guy. And he's just sitting there, and he's this older guy, and he's just sitting there like this. And everything I'm saying, he's just going like this, stone-faced. And something about me stopped caring about the other 1,499 people, and I'm like, I'm gonna break this guy, whatever. And so I look out over the audience, and I said to the audience, I said, guys, nobody pays to come to a conference to learn everything you're doing is right. You came here because you wanted to learn one or two things that you could change, that you could become better. And so I look at the church today, and I say to myself, especially Northeast, don't be offended about this unless you should be offended by this, okay? We're kind of like the check-the-box church, like I went to church, but really we're counting down the minutes until the only game that matters today, which is the Bronco game, when it starts. A lot of Giant fans in here. And yet, when I grew up, church was a place for transformation. Church was a place that you came to have an encounter. Church wasn't a place where you counted down the minutes, counted down the seconds, played another game of Candy Crush, did whatever. Church was a place where you came for an encounter. And so I want to start right now really quickly. Go to John 5. I want to start with this. I'm going to preface this with this right here. And in John chapter 5, you can either listen along with me, trust me, it's there, or you can grab it on your emoji maker. Anybody remember when the phone was actually a phone? Like, remember when, I do everything but call people. Like, how many of you in this room right now have ever texted somebody and got upset when they called you back? And you're like, if I wanted to talk to you, I would have called you, right? Hopefully now you're at John 5. So in John 5, he says, sometime later, Jesus went up to Jerusalem for one of the Jewish festivals. Now there is in Jerusalem near the sheep gate a pool, which in Aramaic is called Bethesda, and which is surrounded by 5 colored colonnades. Here a great number of disabled people used to lie, the blind, the lame, the paralyzed. One who was there had been an invalid for 38 years. When Jesus saw him lying there and learned that he had been in the condition for a long time, he asked him, "Do you want to get well?" Now this is interesting to me because we are a society that takes an Advil when we have a headache. We are, as a whole, people, some of you in here, come to church every single week and you hear about joy and you go home depressed. Some of you in here, you come every week and you hear about love, and yet love is the last thing that you feel. And so this is an interesting scripture to me because Jesus does not say to him, "Do you want to feel better?" Jesus says, "Do you want to get well?" And the point in that is that we don't come to church to mask symptoms. We don't come to church to feel better just to get us through to the next Sunday while we survive in the Monday through Saturday. Jesus looked right at the man who for 38 years had this condition and said, "Do you want to get well?" So my question to you is, coming into church, do you want to get well today? Do you want to get well today? The title of my message today is "The Struggle is Real." And I love the fact, I think it was Belinda told me yesterday, that my wife, when she did an amazing job at the women's conference, the theme she used was "The struggle is real." And I literally had no idea about that. In fact, up until yesterday, my wife thought that she had inspired the message, and I will say subconsciously she did, okay? And the question is, the struggle is real. How many of you in this room have any kind of a struggle? If you are sitting next to somebody who did not raise their hand, please look at them and say you struggle with lying in a church. Lying in a church is a different level of struggle. But what I want to tell you today is that if you're in the struggle, you're in the huddle. Because if you're in the huddle, you're in the game. The struggle is where you want to be. If you're in the struggle, you're in the huddle. Think of it this way. For a believer, the struggle never ends. What did Jesus do right to the end? Jesus, to his last breath, struggled. Jesus, to his last breath, was in pain. And then we wonder why bad things happen. And we go, why am I struggling? I thought I was a Christian now. I thought I was. What happened with our example? If you want to grow closer to your purpose, you have to learn to fall in love with your struggle. Now, I love this example of falling in love. I love that it's not called reaching in love. I love that it's not called jumping in love. I love the fact that it is called falling in love, because it's only when you find yourself in this position can you truly go from like to love. You see, Jesus understood this with his disciples. He had to fall in love with them in order to get to a position where he was able to serve. He was able to wash feet. It is easy to like your spouse. It is a much more difficult thing to fall in love with your spouse. You see, you can be in this room, you can see an attractive man and attractive woman walk by and go, I like what I see. But this is different. I have to like what I don't see. To fall in love, I have to like what I don't see. And in the same way, we have to learn to fall in love with our struggle. And by the way, today's message was spurred or motivated, whatever you want to say, by Pastor Mike's message last week. I thought he did an amazing job. And true to most Sundays, just the way my mind works, he said one thing about struggle, and I spent the rest of the time writing this today. So I'm glad that it worked out like this. See, if you aren't struggling, you aren't surrendering. If you aren't struggling, you're not surrendering, because good struggle only comes from a surrender to a higher purpose than your own. But regardless, I'm going to tell you, whoever you are in this room, you are going to experience storms. But there's two types of storms. The job of a Christian is not to avoid storms. See, there are the world storms, and then there are God's storms. And what is the difference between those two? The world storms tend to come through like destruction. They take everything out. They don't care what's in its way. What does God's storm do? It's a pruning effect. God's storms will take out of your life what it is that you don't want to let go of. But it's only through surrender that we allow ourselves to enter those storms. When you start to identify struggle and you change the... If I said to you and you said to me, "How you doing, Jared?" and I said, "I'm struggling," would that be a good thing or a bad thing? That's a fastball, guys. That's as easy as it's going to get, okay? I see some of you looking around right now. If you said to me, "How are you?" and I said, "I'm struggling," would that be a good thing or a bad thing? You know, sometimes I think it's a bad thing that I grew up in a Pentecostal church because I'm used to people actually answering questions when you say it in front of them. Even sometimes when you don't ask questions, they still. Thank you. Thank you. Don't let this fool you guys. I got a little tan in me, okay? Come on now. So when you identify with struggle, instead of identifying with it as a punishment or a setback, you identify with it as growth. Now you find yourself in a position where you understand the difference between being a blessing and being blessed. I'm going to break that down in about 2 minutes. Let that simmer. There is a difference between being a blessing and singularly being blessed. But sometimes there is a disconnect between our ultimate destiny and our decisions. You see, some people in here think that because, you are a child of God, that everything you do is predestined, and no matter what you do, you are ultimately going to make it to your finish line. I am here to tell you that is nonsense. We make decisions. And there is a disconnect between destiny and decisions, and when you start to connect these things and you understand decisions, you now understand there's two types of struggle. Are you guys taking notes today? Because I hope you're not just staring at me, okay? Thank you. Thank you. Appreciate those are actual notes. I have not seen those in a long time. That is awesome. Good for you. It's not an app at all. It's the notebook app right there. So there's two types of struggle. There is overcoming and there is achievement. You see, if you make the wrong decision and you put yourself on the side of a mountain you shouldn't have been on, you're going to struggle. You are going to be struggling to stay where you are, not fall down the mountain while everything under you is falling down. You're still going to struggle. You see? Only your struggle is going to leave you where you are or ultimately keep you from getting killed. There's another type of struggle when you make right decisions, which is an achievement struggle. When you're actually working towards the things that God had for you. And you're still going to struggle to get there because in the struggle you find that I can't do it alone. I need Him. And yet on both sides of these struggle, we find ourselves exhausted, but one person ends up here and the other person ends up here, and this one goes, "Well, I guess it just wasn't my destiny." No, you make bad decisions. Is it too soon? Was that okay? Destiny and decisions, two types of struggle. And when you don't understand these things, what we start doing is that we start to confuse getting somewhere with making it. We confuse getting somewhere. When you are just a blessed individual, you think every time something happened that it was the fulfillment of what God had for you. And yet God looks at these levels and he goes glory to glory to glory to glory. And you think because you made glory, there is a difference between getting somewhere and actually making it. Because I read a Bible with stories of people who become kings and queens and rulers and all these other things. And then we tell stories when someone picked up our lunch bill. There is a difference. Let me ask you a very simple question. And I want you to answer this honestly in your head. If you found a $20 bill laying on the side of the road, would you assume it was because God was blessing you to pay for your lunch? Or would you assume it was because God wanted to use you and empower you to bless someone else who needed it more than you? That's going to tell me everything I need to know about whether you're a blessing or you're blessed. You know the amazing part of this? This isn't even like I didn't plan this. My son found a $5 bill coming into the sanctuary today. I just asked him down there, what are you going to do with it? And he said, I'm going to put it in the offering. When you understand this, guys, it doesn't only affect you, it affects other people. It lives through you. That's what being a blessing ultimately is, because we were never called to just be singularly blessed. A one-time, thank you, Lord, there's my crack for the day, good to go. We were called to be singularly a vessel that God worked through to affect everyone else, ultimately a blessing. And the amazing part is that when you're a blessing, you're ultimately blessed. You get it in the end anyway. But we have to raise our minds. We've got to renew our minds to understand that being blessed singularly was never what it was about. You want to know what I do differently than so many other people? You just heard it. I have zero interest in one time. Here it is. I want to be a blessing. Does anyone in here want to be a blessing? Do me a favor, guys, turn to 2 Corinthians chapter 12, verse 6. We're going to go through verse 10. Here Paul is writing and he says, even if I should choose to boast, I would not be a fool because I would be speaking the truth. I mean, that's trash talk. Like I used to say that to you and Earl, right? I'd be like, that's not boasting. I'm just telling you what I'm going to do. And then I did it. But it was boasting, okay? But he says it's not. Can we just remember these people are people? Can we stop turning these people into something that they're not? They were people with struggles. He goes on to say, it gets better. But I refrain, so no one will think more of me than is warranted for what I do or say. He went with the humble part. And then before he even finished the sentence, he says, or because of these surpassingly great revelations. He's talking about himself. Like, is anybody this is crazy. He says, therefore, in order to keep me from becoming conceited, too late, I was given a thorn in my flesh, a messenger of Satan to torment me. 3 times I pleaded to the Lord to take it away from me, but he said to me, my grace is sufficient for you. My power is made perfect in weakness. Therefore, I will boast all the more gladly about my weaknesses. So that Christ's power may rest on me. That is why, for Christ's sake, I delight in weaknesses and insults and hardships and persecutions and difficulties. For when I am weak, then I am strong. You ever wanted to rewrite the Bible? Sometimes I read this and I just go for when I am weak, then I want to put then the I, capital A, am strong. For when I am weak, then the I am is strong. But that's not what it says. But sometimes I need to do that for my own good. Struggle is a part of growth. I want to go over right now 2 things that we have to start embracing in order to get the right struggle in our life. You ready? I'm down to 2 people. Are you ready? Yes. Let's go. To start embracing the struggle in your life, you've got to have these two things. Number one, you've got to get specific with what your struggles are. We are a society now that is very vague. We try to appear perfect. Someone says, how's it going? You're like, it's all right, it's good. How's your week? Well, it's been a rough one. Well, I'll pray for you. And we're very vague. And yet, when I look at our example of Jesus, he walks up to the woman at the well in John 4:13. You guys remember this? He walks up to her and he says, I have water that will make you thirst no more. She had 5 husbands, another one. In my generation, someone being thirsty meant something different than probably the Bible meant, especially when they had 5 husbands and someone else right there, but I digress. You got to read this thing the way your mind reads it, guys. Come on now. You're bored because you're not allowing your imagination to go. When I hear someone tell a woman with 5 husbands and another one on the way, go, you're thirsty, I'm not thinking of water. You got me? We can edit that. We can edit. So he looks at her and he says, go get your husband. She says, I don't have a husband. He goes, darn right. I'm Jesus, I knew that. He goes, you had 5 husbands, and the man you're with now is not your husband. He goes directly to the point. He looks at Judas in Matthew 26:23, and he doesn't mince words. He says, go do what you're going to do. Go betray me. He looks at Peter in Matthew 26:34. Again, doesn't mince words. He says, before the rooster crows, you will deny me 3 times. He doesn't say, well, something's going to happen. You're not going to do so good. You're not going to. Jesus was not interested in our facade. He was not interested in our dress up. He was not interested in our Sunday selves. He was not interested in our perfection. And yet, this is why we have so many issues trusting God, embracing struggle. Because we see a God who is so precise. We see a God who goes right at it, and then we live lives where that doesn't add up. And yet I know the number one tool that the enemy will use is confusion. He'll say, did God really say? He'll say to you, struggle is supposed to be defeat. Struggle is supposed to be, he'll change the meaning on things. And he'll make you question what it is you're doing here. Well, if you're a Christian, why are you struggling? Well, and yet that was what was intended all along. That was the example that Christ gave us from the very beginning. Struggle is a part of growth. The second part is that we have to understand that God isn't interested in our perfection. He's interested in our connection. God is not interested in our perfection. He's interested in our connection. Has anyone ever noticed that most testimonials are past tense? Oh, I used to struggle with this. Oh, I had a tough time with this. Oh, I overcame this. But they had a praying grandmother and everything worked out all right. Now, I love the praying grandmother story. I grew up on the praying grandmother story. What I'm saying is that there are people out there in a hurting world that when they walk into a place and think everybody is perfect, they think they don't have a place. And yet I know, looking over this audience right now, that there are people in here right now that struggle to pay their bills. I know that there are people sitting here right now listening to me that walked in holding their spouse's hand and can't stand their spouse. I know that there are people that walked in here right now who are not even listening to what I'm saying because they're having a fake argument in their head about something someone said to them last week that they don't even remember saying to them. A perfect church does not reach anyone. And yet, here's what I love about the gospel. The gospel is not just for the downtrodden. It's for everyone. Look, guys, can I just be I've been here for 20 plus years. Can I just be very honest with you? Because you guys have seen me here, you've seen me here, you've seen me here. Can I just be very honest? Because I'm going to anyway. You ready? I don't have a trouble paying my bills anymore. Because I finally grabbed hold of the principles and the teaching I'd been under for years since I was a child. And I put it into practice. I don't have issues with that, but I still have struggles. Sometimes I make big decisions and I try to convince God that it's His will. Can I still finish this? Is it okay? Am I? Am I not worthy anymore? Sometimes some of you make controversial decisions that you know won't stand up to your friends and family, so you say, God told me to, so that no one can argue with it. Is that not true? We all have struggles. But can we just get something straight here? There is a difference between our destiny and our decisions. Our decisions absolutely matter, but we can't put God's signature on something and say we have a signed baseball card. Only He can sign it. There is a difference between our destiny and our decisions. And this is why struggle is so necessary. You know what I find? I find when I'm in that place, when I just feel like everything's going good and I'm doing everything right, and I'm in the right whatever, I find that I don't feel like I need God. Truth serum? Oh no, I still, hey God, hey. But I just feel like it's going all right. I find that when I'm in the struggle, I need Him. I feel like sometimes when we're in that perfect place, we're like jump roping, if that's even, is that correct? Jump roping? Doing jump rope? Do we have any professional jump ropers? I don't know what the ongoing tense is. So I feel like we're doing this jump rope when everything's going great, and God's watching out over here, and we're creating this force field around us, and He's on the outside going, can I get in now? Can I get in on that game? And you're going, can I now? No? Oh. Because everything's going good. We need the struggle. But here's what I love about God. He keeps giving us chance after chance after chance after chance after chance. And He goes, come on, David, you've screwed up more than most, but let's do it again. He goes, come on, Moses, that wasn't what I planned, but come on, Jared, you still got it. Come on, Bishop, come on, Marco, come on, Ronette, come on, Grayson. Chance after chance after chance, because He was not interested in your perfection. He was interested in your connection, which only happens through your imperfection. And by the way, some of you in here should be very happy that you're not perfect, because He might have asked you to get up on that cross. Look, guys, we all want to get places. We all want to do something with our life. We all want to know what's the reason, like how does it? And we're usually the first ones to recognize our talents. But when you recognize the talents, when you recognize the gifts more than the gifter, we now have a problem. And yet it comes from a good place, because we're like, look, I should be up on that stage. I preach great in my head. I should be doing a special for praise and worship. My grandmother said I'm amazing. Like, I should be. And this is what we do. And there's a part of that that is absolutely in line, in that we should want to do things. We should want to use our gifts. We should want. But too many of us are trying to put the position ahead of the potential. But your potential has to be put in the place before the position ever comes. Because the position will come from connection, not from perfection. We're focused on the wrong things. But when you mix your potential to a connection to the Almighty God, all of a sudden, it's amazingly how quick position opens up. Because God knows He now has somebody He can trust. We just talked about this in the back. We were talking, and last time I got up here, he wasn't here. And I think he was secretly rooting for me, like he wanted me to do well because he didn't want to have to never ask me to get up here again. And he says to me in the back, and he says to me, he goes, you know what's so great about this? He said, I know you can get up and talk to people. I've seen, whatever. He goes, but because you and I are connected, I trust you. He said, because we're connected, I can go somewhere, leave you on a Sunday, and I feel all right. Maybe not after a couple of the comments I made today, but he said that in the back beforehand. Because when there's connection, there's trust. And now potential can ultimately come through. Now, I think a lot of you look at me today because you haven't been around here forever and you think this is easy for me to say. You look at me and you go, he runs businesses, he's got a good family, he seems like a good enough, easy for him to say. Let me just tell you that for most of you, my start was behind you. Okay? Raised by a single mother, food stamps, different dads, abuse, the whole thing. The only difference between me and so many people in here is I grabbed hold of what God had been trying to tell me the whole time. I think that we greatly overestimate what we can do with somebody else's talents, and we underestimate what we can do with our own. I think we greatly overestimate what we can do with somebody else's talents. We underestimate what we can do with our own. And every moment you spend going, what could I do for the kingdom with his talents, is a moment you spend not building your own. You see? Confusion. There is this amazing balance that occurs where on one hand, I understand the gifter, and I also understand the gifts and the talents I have, and I don't devalue them by standing around going, if it's God's will. You got to get out and do something. Like, you got to get out and fail. You have to get out and try stuff. You can't sit around and see if a talent is going to grow when you never planted the seed. It just doesn't work that way. He said to one, I gave 1 talent, to another I gave 2, to another. I don't hear anywhere he said I gave 0 talents. He also didn't say, you can go steal that one. He also didn't say, I'm going to work an amazing work with you while you watch that other person work their talents. We spend way too much time wondering when Christ is coming back and not nearly enough trying to create a suitable bride. Struggle is a part of any growth. Whenever I hear people, when I listen to married couples and they say, oh, the toughest time in a marriage when you first get married. You got to share the toothpaste. I say to those people, you've obviously never had children. Because the toughest time in a marriage is those first 2 years when you are sleep deprived and you are just at each other's throats for no reason at all, and you say things that can never be taken back. But if you can make it through that, it's amazing what you can get through. Because there's something about the necessity for struggle. So what happens when we avoid the struggle in our lives? 2 things happen. You ready for number 1? We're up to 5. We'll get there. First thing that happens is we potentially squander God's plan in our lives. Write that down. Or at least act like it so I'll feel better about myself. Just move your hand. First thing we do is we potentially squander God's plan in our lives. I want to read to you 2 different stories right now. It's going to be the tale of 2 stories. First, I want you to turn to Mark chapter 4, verse 35. This is when Jesus calms the storm. Mark chapter 4, verses 35 through 41. It says, that day, when evening came, he said to his disciples, let us go over to the other side. Leaving the crowd behind, they took him along just as he was in the boat. There was also other boats with him. A furious squall came up, and the waves broke over the boat, so that it was nearly swamped. Jesus was in the stern, sleeping on a cushion. The disciples woke him and said to him, Teacher, don't you care if we drown? By the way, isn't this so like us? Nobody said, Jesus, are you all right? Son of God, Savior of all the world, are you okay? No. We looked at him and said, Jesus, what about me? Is that not the story? Come on. I mean, if I had my dog on the boat, I'd be like, Bronco, you okay? And yet they went to the Son of God. Do you care about us? God. He got up, rebuked the wind, and said to the waves, "Quiet, be still." Then the wind died down, and it was completely calm. He said to his disciples, "Why are you so afraid? Do you still have no faith?" Now again, this is how I read the Bible. I'm picturing Jesus saying to Peter, "Do you love me?" And now I'm picturing Jesus saying to those people on the boat, "Do you trust me?" And their answer being clear. They were terrified and asked each other, "Who is this? Even the wind and the waves obey him." The second story I want to read is in Daniel 3. It's the story of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And just so you know, I'm going to say it wrong at some point, so just get ready. And we're going to start off in verse 16. Up until this point, they had been summoned to the king, King Nebuchadnezzar, because they refused to worship his gods. I'm going to read this really quickly for those of you that don't know the story, and then we're going to talk about the tale of two stories. In verse 16, after they had been brought to the king, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego replied to him, "King Nebuchadnezzar, we do not need to defend ourselves before you in this matter. If we are thrown into the blazing furnace, the God we serve is able to deliver us from it, and he will deliver us from your majesty's hand. But even if he does not," this is amazing, "but even if he does not, we want you to know, your majesty, that we will not serve your gods or worship the image of gold you have set up." I'm just thinking about just how, defiant. My brother-in-law tells me that if, terrorists took him aside and, they were ready to, get him for the codes to a nuclear bomb, he'd be like, "Just no need to do it. Just get a pen and a paper, and I'll tell you everything you need to know. No need to take any nails off. No need." And yet, you and I find that funny. And yet here we see a completely different example. In verses 19 through 23, the king gets furious. He sets up the furnace. It gets 7 times hotter, which I don't know how it gets hotter. I feel like that's because I feel like there's a boiling point and that's it. But that's, just, again, a story for another day. And then he throws them in there, and even the workers dead. In verse 24, King Nebuchadnezzar leaped to his feet in amazement and asked his advisors, "Weren't there 3 men that we tied up and threw into the fire?" They replied, "Certainly, your majesty." He said, "Look, I see 4 men walking in around the fire, unbound and unharmed, and the 4th looks like the son of the gods." Nebuchadnezzar then approached the opening of the blazing furnace and shouted, "Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, servants of the Most High God, come out, come here." They come out with no marks, no evidence of being in there, nothing like that. And in verse 28, Nebuchadnezzar says, "Praise be to the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who has sent his angel and rescued his servants. They trusted in him and defied the king's command and were willing to give up their lives rather than serve or worship any god except their own God. Therefore, I decree that the people of any nation or language who say anything against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego be cut into pieces and thrown, their houses be burned into piles of rubble, for no other God can save in this way." Then the king promoted them in the province of Babylon. So I see a tale of 2 stories right now. Let me ask you a question. Give me a little leeway right now. Is it possible in the first story that the boat was supposed to sink? Is it possible that Jesus wasn't worried because he was about to create a miraculous story that we would read for years to come? Is it possible that the people on their boat, their destiny was to be a part of this amazing, miraculous story where the boat went to the bottom of the sea, and just when they thought it was over, Jesus stepped up? And is it possible that that's what was actually supposed to happen? Or do you just read the Bible and think everyone in it is perfect and it happened as it was supposed to happen? You see, the disciples weren't in sin because they got worried on the boat when things got bad. Peter wasn't in sin when he got worried when walking on the water with his eyes on Jesus. They were in sin for how they responded in the middle of the storm. Even Jesus cried out on the cross, "Why have you forsaken me?" Jesus. So what happened here? Why have you forsaken me? But how he cried out is what matters. He wasn't asking God to make the storm stop. He was determined to get through it. Is it possible that it was supposed to go another way? And you say, well, there's no way that that would happen. There's no way that he would take his disciples and drown them and put them in. I say there's no way he'd take 3 of his followers and throw them into the lions with fire. And you say, yeah, but this is different because he was on the boat. So he's not going to do it when he's on the boat. Because I read in Daniel 3:25, it says, look, I see 4 men walking around in the fire, unbound and unarmed. And he was there the whole time. And I want to tell you that just because things look a certain way, just because they look scary, just because it looks like God isn't there the whole time, he's there the whole time. And there is a difference between our destiny and our decisions. You see, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, third time got it right, they were destined to be in that fire. They were destined because it was the only place that they were going to get and reach their fullest potential. Because it wasn't enough for them to get there. They had to make it. It wasn't enough for them to be a part of a story and to say, hey, he's going to save me, probably wait till the last minute and then run out. The only place that they were going to reach their fullest potential was in the struggle that God had allowed to happen. You cannot say that his ways are higher than my ways and then act like the puppeteer of your life and get upset when the show doesn't go on as planned. Because when they came out of the fire, it says there wasn't a burn, there wasn't a singe, there wasn't, because the safest place they could possibly be was in the struggle. And yet the place that we avoid over and over and over again is the struggle. And yet what I love about God, he says, another chance, another chance, another chance, another chance. But as long as you're looking at struggle as defeat, as long as you're looking at struggle as something that is bad in your life, you will never reach God's fullest potential for your life. Because it's only through the struggle that we know we need him. Which brings me to my second part. The second thing we do when we avoid the struggle is we potentially squander God's plan in other people's lives. And this is a much bigger issue. You see, in that same story, we see that the king decreed that nobody is to worship any other god, for no other god can save in this way. And we see as a result of their submission and their love for the struggle that a whole land of people now served the rightful God. We also see them get promoted to the place that they belong. But more importantly, if they hadn't have done that, we would be reading a different Bible today. Just like if the disciples had acted differently, we would be reading a different Bible today. Does anyone think it's crazy that my kids trust me more than most of us trust God? If I told my oldest son, Grayson, and I said, you're going to eat this, it's poisonous, but don't worry, you're going to be okay, he'd be a little confused, but he'd eat it. Because he trusts me. It's not our job to determine what struggles are right for us based on the lens that we see as good and bad for our life. It's our job to die to ourselves so that the way can live through us regardless of our opinions. When we avoid the struggles, we hinder other people. God understood this, and please hear me right now, guys. God understood this, and that's why just as powerful as Jesus' body being put up on the cross was Jesus' body being taken off the cross. If God would have hidden the part of that equation that looked like defeat, his dead body coming off, the resurrection would have never have had as much power as it has today, because they wouldn't have believed that he actually died. And so God understands what I'm trying to tell you today. The world has been changed because of what I'm trying to tell you here. We couldn't just see his living body be put up on that cross. We needed to see his lifeless body be taken off of that cross. And in your life, it is absolutely no different. If the people around you only see the wins in your life, if the people around you only see the good stuff going on in your life, if the people around you only see the perfection going on in your life, and they don't get to see the struggle, they don't get to see what you actually struggle with, and more importantly, who brings you through that struggle, then the resurrected power has no power in your life. They need to see both. And I know for me, if I just saw the body on the cross, people still think Tupac is alive, everyone. Show me the body. For 70% of you, that was a rapper in the 90s. He was a... Come on now. And you don't think they would have questioned the Son of the living God and they questioned Tupac? Just go Google it. Just go Google it. You see what I'm saying? Just as important in your life, just as important, is not the highlights. Your highlights only manifest themselves when they see what it took to get to the highlight, and more importantly, who brought you through to be able to have the highlight. Look, when you understand the struggle is real, you understand that it's necessary to have storms. You understand it's necessary to have the right storms. But more importantly, you understand that Jesus is with you through the whole thing and has a purpose for that struggle. Do bad things happen to good people? My son said to me a couple months ago, we knew a family that was going through a horrendous thing. My son was having a really hard time with it. I mean, a really hard time. And he looked at me and he said, "Daddy," and he had tears in his eyes, and he said, "Daddy, why do such bad things happen to such good families?" And I looked at him and I said, "Son, it was never part of the process or part of the promise that bad things wouldn't happen." I said, "Why do you think I make you put your seatbelt on when we get in the car? Why do you think I make you look both ways? There is an enemy who comes to kill, steal, and destroy. That's what he does. And I'm going to tell you right now that if he's doing that to you, it's because you matter. And he would love nothing more than the people in this room to avoid struggle, live a mediocre life, die, and then move on. But I know, for one, that the struggle is real. There is power and purpose in the right struggles. Amen? Amen. Thank you. That went by quick.